Here we are at the end, episode 6 of series 12. Hopefully it's not the end of the end, but it's certainly the end of this series. Okay, I enjoyed this episode, I think the most out of all of them. In fact, yeah, I definitely did. This episode I noted I laughed or giggled, whatever, smiled at least 15 or 16 times. There's about probably 3 or 4 occasions actually where jokes actually made me laugh out loud, which hasn't really happened too much this series. This for me was by far the funniest of the episodes. Now, although the episode would be started off for the first few minutes a little bit slow between Kat and Rimmer, it moved along once the other two guys arrived and they'd found the captain's statistics or all his records he'd been keeping of the crew. Had a little look through, and there's a sort of a fairly funny joke with Lister and what his one said. And then Rimmer, and about how he's not really achieved anything and how he always blames everybody else, and he started blaming them. And they said, how can you blame us? And he was sort of mentioned about how, you're supposed to surround yourself with people that are more successful, better than you. And they responded, you have, even with those three. That's sort of the start of how this episode sort of went. It was quite funny for me, at least, anyway. And then leading up to the sort of the main premise of the episode, there was another sort of couple of good jokes about one with Crichton saying how he's trying to get Lister to eat more fruit, and Rimmer remarked about how it'd be easier to get a vampire to eat garlic bread than to get Lister to eat fruit, which I quite like that joke. And so then this leads on to the sort of the main premise of the episode, which is there's a lesion that's opened in space as a result of an experiment Crichton's been doing, which has basically created a scenario where things that haven't happened now do happen. It's almost sort of opposite. So if you say you're going to do something, the opposite then goes and happens. And this works quite well, actually, with Kat, who I have moaned about a couple of times in the previous episodes. But although there was a couple of jokes again in that sort of area that I've moaned about previously in this, Kat did do quite a good performance with some of the stuff, especially the bit where he's with Lister in the sort of the crew quarters, and they're discovering how doing this opposite thing sort of works, or it's discovering that it's happening by Lister asking Kat to sort of polish his shoes and various things like that, and he'd say, no, I wouldn't do that, why would I do that? And then he's doing it, make me a cup of tea. And the funniest bit for me was the bit where he said, right, make me breakfast. He goes, I'm not going to make you breakfast, and all of a sudden there he is dancing in the kitchen making breakfast for Lister. To be honest, that was all pretty funny. That whole bit I thought was pretty good, and like I said, it was good to see Kat being funny and having some good stuff to work with, and that happens a few other times throughout this episode as well, actually. So whilst that's going on with Kat and Lister, Rimmer and Crichton are sort of discovering this as well, and Crichton's sort of suggesting he'll do some experiment to try and figure out what's going on. And he sort of suggested it'd be kind of weird, but not that weird. And Rimmer remarked, how weird would that be? And he said pretty sort of 1989 Michael Jackson weird. And then they sort of went on there, and then as he sort of explained more what he thought was going on and demonstrating it by throwing an apple that turned into an orange or vice versa, Rimmer then remarked, no, that's more of a sort of 1993 Michael Jackson weird. And yeah, that was another joke that I did actually find pretty funny. Moving on from there, the four guys eventually do sort of meet up. Again, Kat was being quite funny with not really quite working out how to do this whole thing. And to the extent where Crichton explains to them that he's been basically working on this experiment, and this is why this situation has occurred, and it's basically caused this lesion in space. And he's got this machine that basically means you can jump from different realities and see sort of how other outcomes of your life may have worked out if you'd made decisions the opposite, in essence, or different to what you'd done in your current life, which seemed quite attractive to Rimmer. And so he sort of basically took him up on the offer and decided he would start jumping through different dimensions to see, in essence, if he could get a better life than the one he's got, which, from his perspective, wouldn't be very difficult. And then this leads on to the other parts where we've got some great sort of little references back to the first series, especially the first episode again. Most notably would be the return of Holly the computer, the male one, where Rimmer has jumped to one of these other dimensions and Holly is the computer. And Rimmer was quite surprised to see Holly and sort of basically asked, are you still sort of a computer that's struggling? Because obviously Holly was never the greatest computer in the world. And Holly was explaining, yes, I get tested all the time. I get tested for this, tested for that. And Rimmer was very impressed by that. And then he sort of asked, well, have you got the sort of certificate to prove that? To which Holly then explained, no, because he didn't actually pass the test, which I thought was quite funny. And the whole bit with Holly, to be honest, was really good. We had a great reference to the first episode after Rimmer had basically killed everybody and was asking Holly, everybody's dead. This is obviously in the first episode, and goes through a list of different names. What, that person's dead? He's, yes, Rimmer, that person's dead. Da-da-da. And the same thing happened in this episode, but the other way round, where Rimmer's questioning, this person's alive? Nobody's dead at all? And Holly's like, yes, this person's alive, that person's alive. And sort of basically got to eventually where Holly's just like, I wish I never brought this up. We then led on to another good joke between the two of them, which was where Rimmer was asking, so there hasn't been a radioactive, sort of meltdown to an extent or whatever it was that happens. And he's going, no, there hasn't been at all. And he's like, that's really good. Oh, so then Holly says, I'm sorry to cut you off, I've just got to do something. And then basically starts announcing that there's been a radioactive leak and everyone needs to start running around panicking, which again was a good joke. The whole bit with Holly was really good. And we also saw the captain as well, who was trying to escape in a pod, explaining to Rimmer how he'd accidentally fell in there and then accidentally pressed the wrong button and accidentally can't help Rimmer, even though it's a full pod, escape pod. Although his pod does actually malfunction, so he doesn't escape anyway. Which then leads Rimmer to jump onto some other different dimensions. We go through a sort of a fair few, a couple that are sort of more notable than others. The first being Rimmer comes back to a ship and there's Crichton, and the ship generally looks quite nice. It's got some sort of kind of plants and everything like that, and he meets Lister, and Lister is sort of a well-to-do chap and's all sort of well looked after and sort of quite respectable, and likes vintage wires or whatever the case is, which really seems to appeal to Rimmer. And then Rimmer asks, where's Cat? And they question, like, who do you mean by Cat? And then Mr. Rat turns up. And Mr. Rat was pretty bloody funny, to be honest. And he came and sat down, and the way he talked, the whole thing about Mr. Rat was, I have to say, surprisingly good. And you could even see a point actually where Rimmer, as the actor, had to just sort of hesitate a little bit, because you could see he was about to laugh when Cat sat down. Mr. Rat sat down, but he sort of took a second to compose himself. I'm pretty sure I watched it back again. I'm pretty sure he did try to stop himself laughing at that point, and there was a fair few bits there that were pretty funny. In essence, Rimmer discovered that the ship, instead of having the cat there, has got lots and lots of rats that are all over the place, of these giant-sized, sort of man-sized rats, and sort of decided he didn't want to live there anymore. And so he jumped onto a few more places, which eventually led to him sort of coming to the sort of, in essence, not the final one, but the sort of final one, which was a life that seemed to pretty much have everything he wanted. He was, I think, navigational officer. He had a wife, he had 4 kids, they were 4 boys, he was really pleased about all of that. He then got told he needed to go and see the captain, so he went over to report to the captain and discovers that was Lister, which, within the part where they're having their conversation and everything, results in them being, again, a flashback to the first series and first episode of the entire Red Dwarf, which was their original sort of crew quarters that they stayed in. They went there and had a little chat about stuff, and it discovered that basically Lister has got everything, even though he hasn't really worked that hard for it. It was more for the fact that he managed to stop the leak from happening, and then through a sort of variety of slightly fortunate manoeuvres that he did, ended up being the captain of the ship and also very, very wealthy. Now, although Rimmer had everything he pretty much wanted, he couldn't live with the fact that Lister was better than him or had more than him, and as a result decided he didn't want to stay in that dimension either, and in the end resulted in him coming back to the original dimension that we were in with the original 3 crew. And although he didn't sort of say anything, he decided to stay there, and so basically sat down to play cards with them or wherever it was at that point. And I mean, if that is the sort of the end of Red Dwarf, I don't know, I haven't done sort of too much research into it. If that was the last episode, it was quite good. You know, they haven't sort of blown it up too much, but it was quite good that Rimmer sort of ended up deciding that actually this is probably the best I've got, because maybe I'm a little bit better than Lister in this universe, although that's debatable. So yeah, that's the episode on the whole. Like I say, I thought this particular episode was really funny, actually. Definitely the best episode for me of the lot. I've enjoyed pretty much all of Series 12. There was one episode I picked up on a little bit, but I still did enjoy that episode. The rest I thought had been pretty good, but this one does stand out. And in terms of having a laugh and jokes sort of hitting home, it worked pretty well. And although we've had a few throughout this series, certainly the sort of flashbacks to the original series with having the captain and Holly, certainly having Holly back in it was very good. And that almost the whole bit with Holly in was funny from start to finish. Him and Rimmer really worked well together, and it was really good to see that back. And just another little nod to the rat character as well, which I don't know, maybe other people didn't find that so funny, but I found that really funny. And Cat himself was pretty funny throughout most of the episode, which was a pleasant change to sort of most of this particular series. So yeah, my final verdict for this particular episode is a 9 out of 10. And my overall review for Series 12 of Red Dwarf will be an 8 out of 10. And just as a final comment, thank you to everybody who has watched my reviews of Series 12 of Red Dwarf. I've also really enjoyed seeing people's comments about what they've thought of the various episodes. Some have agreed with me, some haven't. That's always good. And yeah, if you've enjoyed what you've seen, I'll be making more videos like this in the future. So if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to my channel. And I hope to see you again soon.